They said I married their son for his money. They whispered behind gloved hands at every family gathering, their eyes tracking my off-the-rack dresses and second-hand purses like I was wearing evidence of my supposed gold-digging schemes. They laughed, actually laughed out loud, when I showed up to my father's funeral in a simple black dress from Target, my grief raw and exposed, while they sat in the back pew like they were attending some social event beneath their status. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined in their wildest dreams, was that the inheritance my father left behind would make their multi-million-dollar real estate empire look like pocket change. And the will reading that was about to happen would teach them a lesson in humility, karma, and the danger of judging a book by its cover, a lesson so powerful that it would echo through Atlanta's elite social circles for years to come. My name is Keisha Thompson Morrison. Well, it was Morrison anyway. Now I'm back to being Keisha Williams, and I've never been prouder of that name. If you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage, if you've been judged by people who never bothered to know your story, if you've been underestimated because of where you came from, the neighborhood you grew up in, the school you attended, or the size of your bank account, then you need to hear what happened when my father's attorney stood up in that mahogany conference room and read the words that silenced an entire room full of people who thought they were better than me. People who thought that money and status gave them the right to look down on others, who thought that designer labels and country club memberships made them superior human beings. Before we dive deep into this story, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of how this played out, I need you to do something for me. If you love tales of karma, the kind where the universe steps in and balances the scales in the most unexpected and satisfying ways, if you appreciate stories of unexpected comebacks, of underdogs rising up and claiming what's rightfully theirs, and if you believe in the kind of poetic justice that reminds us that truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried, then hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that notification bell so you never miss a story from Milan Folk Tales, because we're building a community here of people who believe in justice, in second chances, in the power of truth. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to know where my Milan Folk Tales family is watching from today. Are you in Atlanta like me? New York? Chicago? Los Angeles? Houston? Somewhere in between? Let me know, because this story is for everyone who's ever been counted out, dismissed, or told they weren't good enough. Now let me take you back to where this entire journey began, back to a warm spring evening in Atlanta 5 years ago that would change the entire trajectory of my life. I met Marcus Morrison at a community center fundraiser in the Sweet Auburn district, a neighborhood rich with Black history and culture. The kind of place where you could still feel the presence of leaders who'd walked those streets decades before. I was volunteering that day, serving food to families in need, my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing faded jeans and a volunteer t-shirt that had seen better days. My hands smelled like the fried chicken we'd been serving for hours, and I had cornbread crumbs on my sleeve. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to give back to my community, to the neighborhood that had raised me, to the people who looked like my father and me. Marcus walked in, wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, Italian leather shoes so shiny I could see my reflection in them, and a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. He was tall, 6'2", with smooth dark skin, a perfectly lined beard, and the kind of confident stride that came from never having to worry about money. But when our eyes met across that crowded community center, across plates of collard greens and sweet potato pie, something shifted in the air between us. The noise of the room seemed to fade away. He smiled, and it wasn't the polite, distant smile of someone doing charity work for the photo op. It was genuine, warm, reaching all the way to his eyes. He walked over to where I was stationed behind the serving table, and instead of treating me like the help, he asked my name. We talked for 20 minutes while I served food, about the neighborhood, about the families we were helping, about why community service mattered. He told me his family owned Morrison Properties, one of the largest Black-owned real estate development companies in the Southeast, with luxury condos, shopping centers, and commercial buildings across Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. They were featured in Black Enterprise magazine. His parents had met presidents and senators, but when he talked to me, he didn't lead with any of that. He asked about my work, my passions, my dreams. I told him I was an art teacher at a Title I school on the West Side, that I worked with underprivileged kids who couldn't afford art supplies, who'd never been to a museum, who didn't even know that creativity could be a pathway to healing, to self-expression, to a better life. I told him about how I used my own money to buy paintbrushes and canvases, how I stayed late to help students work on projects, how I believed with every fiber of my being that art could change lives. And he listened, really listened, like every word I said mattered. "You light up when you talk about your students," he said, leaning against the serving table. "That's beautiful. That's real. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do," I admitted. "Make a difference. Leave something behind that matters more than money." He nodded slowly. "I wish more people thought like that." We exchanged numbers that night, and 3 days later, he called. Not texted, called, like communication still mattered. We went to dinner at a small soul food restaurant in Edgewood. Nothing fancy, just good food and good conversation. He told me he was tired of the shallow dating scene in Atlanta's elite circles, tired of women who only saw his last name and his bank account, tired of pretending to care about yacht parties and charity galas that raised money just so rich people could feel good about themselves. "I want something real," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Someone who sees me, not my family's empire." "I don't care about your family's empire," I told him honestly. "I care about who you are when nobody's watching." We fell in love fast, maybe too fast. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. He'd show up at my tiny apartment in East Point with takeout, and we'd eat on my second-hand couch while watching old movies. I'd meet him after work, and we'd walk through Piedmont Park, talking about everything and nothing. He loved that I wasn't impressed by his money, that I challenged him, that I had my own dreams and ambitions that had nothing to do with his family's success. 6 months after we met, he proposed. We were at Stone Mountain, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, and he got down on one knee with a ring that must have cost a fortune. But all I saw was the look in his eyes, the vulnerability, the hope. "Keisha Williams," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You make me want to be better. You make me remember what matters. Will you marry me?" I said yes, tears streaming down my face, thinking that love was enough, thinking that if we loved each other, we could overcome anything. I was so young, so naive, so completely unprepared for what was coming. From the moment I walked into the Morrison family estate for our engagement dinner, I felt the chill in the air, and it had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The estate was in Buckhead, Atlanta's wealthiest neighborhood, a sprawling mansion with white columns, manicured gardens, and a circular driveway that could fit 20 cars. I'd spent a week's salary on a dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant navy sheath that I thought would be appropriate. I'd gotten my hair done, bought new shoes, practiced what I'd say. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted them to see what Marcus saw in me. Patricia Morrison answered the door herself, which surprised me. She was a striking woman in her early 60s, with expertly styled silver hair, flawless makeup, and a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my car. She looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate assessment that made me feel like I was being appraised and found lacking. Her eyes lingered on my dress, my shoes, my simple pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. "So you're Keisha," she said, her tone flat, the words devoid of warmth. "Marcus has told us about you." "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Morrison," I said, extending my hand and trying to sound confident despite the anxiety twisting in my stomach. She shook it limply, like touching me might be contagious. "Come in. The family is waiting." The family. The way she said it made it clear that I was not yet part of that family, and maybe never would be. The dining room was like something out of a magazine. A table that could seat 20 people, set with fine china and crystal glasses that sparkled under an enormous chandelier. Sterling Morrison sat at the head of the table, a distinguished man in his mid-60s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of closing million-dollar deals. Marcus's sister, Vanessa, sat to his right, a corporate attorney with straightened hair, designer glasses, and an expression that could freeze water. She was beautiful in that intimidating, untouchable way, like she'd never had a bad day in her life. Cousin Brittany was there too, along with Marcus's Uncle Clayton and Aunt Diane. 8 people total, all dressed like they were attending a state dinner, all turning to look at me as I entered the room. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, suddenly aware of every flaw, every imperfection. My dress wasn't designer. My shoes were last season. My jewelry was costume, not couture. "Everyone," Marcus said, his hand on the small of my back. "This is Keisha, my fiancé." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Sterling nodded curtly. "Have a seat." I sat next to Marcus, directly across from Vanessa, who was staring at me with undisguised curiosity, like I was a science experiment she couldn't quite figure out. Patricia took her seat at the other end of the table, and a server I hadn't noticed before began bringing out courses, starting with a salad that had more components than I could identify. "So Keisha," Patricia began, picking up her fork with practiced elegance, "Marcus tells us you're a teacher." The way she said the word teacher made it sound like I'd said I was unemployed. "Yes, ma'am. I teach art at Douglas Middle School on the West Side." "How quaint," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "Art! I suppose someone has to teach that." "I think it's important work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A lot of our students come from difficult backgrounds. Art gives them an outlet, a way to express themselves, to process trauma." Vanessa set down her fork. "That's very noble. But what's the career trajectory there? I mean, surely you're not planning to be a middle school art teacher forever?" "I love what I do," I said. "It's not about the career trajectory. It's about making a difference." She exchanged a glance with her mother, a look that said everything. This girl doesn't get it. Sterling jumped in, changing the subject to business. "Marcus, we need to discuss the Riverside project. The permits finally came through, and we're ready to break ground." For the next hour, they talked business. Property acquisitions, zoning laws, investment portfolios, market projections. They used terms I didn't understand, deliberately, I realized, excluding me from the conversation. Every time I tried to ask a question or contribute, Patricia would say something like, "It's complicated, dear. Don't worry about it." or Sterling would talk over me like I hadn't spoken. Marcus noticed, I could tell, but he didn't say anything. He just squeezed my hand under the table, a silent apology that did nothing to ease the humiliation burning in my chest. Toward the end of dinner, Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "So Keisha, tell us about your family. Where are you from?" "I grew up in Mechanicsville," I said. "My father raised me after my mother passed when I was young." "Mechanicsville," she repeated, like she was tasting something sour. "And what does your father do?" "He works for the United States Postal Service," I said, lifting my chin. "He's been there for almost 40 years. He's a hard-working man who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities." "A mailman," Patricia said, not even bothering to correct herself to postal worker. "That's sweet." The table went quiet again, but this time the silence was loaded with judgment. I could feel their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken them aloud. "She's not one of us. She doesn't belong. She's probably after Marcus's money." When dinner finally ended, Marcus walked me to my car, his face apologetic. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "They can be a little intense, but they'll warm up to you. They just need time." "Time?" I said, my voice shaking. "Marcus, they treated me like I was invisible, like I wasn't good enough to sit at their table." "That's just how they are with everyone at first. Don't take it personally." "How can I not take it personally?" He pulled me into a hug. "Because I love you, and that's all that matters. They'll come around. I promise." But they never came around. If anything, it got worse. When we got married 6 months later, it was a beautiful ceremony at a historic church in Sweet Auburn, the neighborhood where we'd met. I'd wanted something meaningful, something that honored my roots and my father's community. Patricia had wanted the wedding at their country club. We compromised, which meant I gave in and held the reception at the country club while keeping the ceremony at the church. At the reception, Patricia gave a speech that made my blood run cold. She stood at the microphone in a designer gown, champagne glass in hand, and said, "Family is everything to the Morrisons. We've built our legacy over generations through hard work, sacrifice, and protecting what we've created. It's essential that we preserve our values, our standards, and our way of life. That we're careful about who we allow into our inner circle." She looked directly at me when she said that last part. The message was clear. You're not really one of us, and you never will be. Marcus didn't say anything. He just smiled and raised his glass like his mother had given a beautiful toast. That's when I should have known. That's when I should have walked away. But I loved him, and I believed that love could overcome anything. I was wrong. After the wedding, we moved into the guest house on the Morrison estate. It was nicer than any place I'd ever lived, 3 bedrooms, marble bathrooms, a kitchen with appliances I didn't know how to use. But it wasn't ours. It belonged to them. We were living on their property, under their watch, subject to their rules. Marcus said it made sense financially. "We can save money," he said. "Build up our savings." But Marcus had a trust fund worth millions and a 6-figure salary from Morrison Properties. We didn't need to save. This wasn't about money. It was about control. Patricia would show up unannounced, walking into our space like she owned it, which technically she did. She'd comment on my decorating choices, my cooking, the way I kept house. "I see you're still using that old couch from your apartment," she'd say, wrinkling her nose. "Wouldn't you rather have something more appropriate?" Vanessa would stop by on weekends, always dressed impeccably, always making subtle digs. "Still teaching?" "That's adorable." Most women in this family pursue more ambitious careers. The family dinners were the worst. Every Sunday, the entire Morrison clan would gather at the main house. I'd sit at that long table, invisible and alone, while they discussed business deals, investment strategies, and social events I wasn't invited to. One Sunday, they spent an hour discussing estate planning and generational wealth, talking about trusts and inheritances and protecting assets. Sterling looked at me at one point and said, "You wouldn't understand, Keisha. These are complex financial matters, very different from your world." "Try me," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I'm not stupid." "No one said you were stupid, dear," Patricia interjected. "Just inexperienced. You come from a different background. There's no shame in that." But the way she said it made it clear that yes, there was shame in that. Shame in being from Mechanicsville. Shame in having a father who worked for the Postal Service. Shame in teaching art to poor kids instead of closing real estate deals. Marcus would defend me at first, but gradually, over months and years, his defense grew weaker. "That's just how my mother is," became his favorite excuse. "Dad's under a lot of stress. Vanessa doesn't mean anything by it." He stopped seeing the insults. Or maybe he just stopped caring. He was changing, becoming more like them, and I was losing the man I'd fallen in love with. I kept teaching, kept taking the bus to my Title I school while Marcus drove his BMW to Morrison Properties every morning. I'd come home exhausted from dealing with overcrowded classrooms, from buying supplies with my own money, from trying to inspire kids who'd been failed by every system meant to protect them. And Marcus would come home talking about his day, about the new development they were planning, about the 7-figure deal he'd just closed, completely oblivious to the growing chasm between us. I tried to talk to him about it. "I feel isolated," I said one night as we lay in bed. "Your family makes me feel like I don't belong." "You're being too sensitive," he replied, not looking up from his phone. "They've accepted you. You're part of the family now." "Have they? Because it doesn't feel that way." "Keisha, I had a long day. Can we not do this right now?" That's when I realized I was alone. Alone in my marriage, alone in that guest house, alone at those Sunday dinners. I had no allies in this family, not even my husband. Then everything changed. My father called me on a Tuesday evening. I was grading papers, trying to focus despite the loneliness that had become my constant companion. "Baby girl," he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the pain he was trying to hide. "I need to tell you something." My heart stopped. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "I went to the doctor today. They found something. Cancer. It's aggressive, honey. They're saying 6 months, maybe less." The world tilted. My father, Jerome Williams, the strongest man I knew, the man who'd raised me alone after my mother passed, who'd worked double shifts to pay for my school supplies, who'd never missed a parent-teacher conference, who'd taught me that character mattered more than money, was dying. I couldn't breathe. "I'm coming over," I said, grabbing my keys. "Right now." "Baby girl, it's late." "I don't care. I'm coming." I drove to his house in Mechanicsville, the small 3-bedroom he'd owned for 40 years, the house I'd grown up in. He was sitting on the porch waiting for me, and when I saw how thin he'd gotten, how tired he looked, I burst into tears. He held me like he'd done when I was little, when I'd scraped my knee or had a bad day at school, and he said, "It's going to be okay." "How can you say that?" I sobbed. "I can't lose you, Daddy. I can't." "You're not going to lose me, baby. I'll always be with you. Always." Over the next few weeks, I learned the details. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It had spread to his liver and lungs. The treatments were brutal. And even with aggressive chemotherapy, his chances weren't good. I wanted to take time off work to care for him, but we couldn't afford it. My teacher's salary barely covered my expenses, and Marcus's money was tied up in his family's business and his trust fund. I asked Marcus if we could borrow against his trust to get my father into a better treatment facility, one with access to experimental therapies and top oncologists. He looked uncomfortable. I'd have to ask my parents about accessing the trust early. There are conditions. Conditions? Marcus, my father is dying. I know, baby, but my parents control the trust until I'm 35. And you know how they feel about lending money, even to family. My father is your family now, I said, my voice rising. I'm your wife. That makes him your father-in-law. Doesn't that mean anything? It's complicated. There are legal implications, tax issues. I'm not asking for $1 million. I'm asking for help with medical bills. Your family spends more on a vacation than my father's treatment would cost. He sighed, running his hand over his face. Let me talk to them, okay? I'll see what I can do. He talked to them, and 2 days later, he came back with an answer. They said no, he told me, not meeting my eyes. They think it's not a good investment. The prognosis isn't promising, and they don't want to set a precedent of using family money for medical expenses. An investment? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You asked them if saving my father's life was a good investment? Those weren't my words, Keisha. But you're standing here repeating them like they make sense. Like my father's life is something that needs to generate a return. That's not fair. What's not fair is that your family has more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, and they won't lift a finger to help my father. What's not fair is that I married into a family that values profit margins over human life. You're being emotional. My father is dying, Marcus. Of course I'm emotional. He left the room, and I knew then that I was truly on my own. I called my father that night and told him I'd figure something out. Baby girl, he said, his voice weak from the chemo. Don't you go begging those people for nothing, you hear me? I've lived a good life. I'm at peace with what's coming. I can't just accept this, Daddy. Listen to me, he said, his voice gaining strength. I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small. You're a Williams, and we've always stood tall, even when we had nothing but our pride and our integrity. Don't you forget that. I won't, Daddy. And one more thing. If something happens to me, you make sure you're at the will reading. I've made arrangements, and I need you to be there. It's important. What arrangements? Just promise me, baby girl. I promise. 3 weeks later, my father passed away in the county hospice facility. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and I felt like a piece of my soul had been ripped away. The man who'd been my anchor, my guide, my biggest cheerleader, was gone, and I was alone in a way I'd never been before. The Morrisons didn't come to the funeral. Patricia sent a bouquet of flowers with a card that read, "Our condolences on your loss," not even signed by hand, printed. Marcus made an appearance, showed up at the church in Mechanicsville 20 minutes late, stayed through the service, shook a few hands, and then left. I'm sorry, baby, he said, kissing my forehead. Emergency at work. I'll see you tonight. He didn't come home that night, or the next night. When he finally showed up, he said he'd been dealing with a crisis at the company, and I was too exhausted to fight. I sat in that small church, surrounded by my father's friends, his colleagues from the Postal Service, neighbors who'd known him for decades, church members who'd watched me grow up, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. These people, with their modest clothes and their genuine tears, had shown up for my father. His own family couldn't even bother. after the burial, after I'd returned to the Morrison guest house and was sitting in the dark trying to process the enormity of my loss, Marcus came home with news. "My parents are hosting a family brunch tomorrow," he said. "They think it might help take your mind off things. You should come." I didn't want to go. I wanted to sit in my grief, to remember my father, to process the fact that the most important person in my life was gone. But Marcus insisted. "It'll be good for you to be around family," he said, completely missing the irony. So the next day, I put on the same simple black dress I'd worn to the funeral. I didn't have the energy to change, to dress up, to pretend. I drove to the Morrison estate, my eyes still swollen from crying, my heart still shattered, and I walked into a nightmare. The moment I entered the dining room, I knew I'd made a mistake. The entire Morrison family was there: Sterling, Patricia, Vanessa, Brittany, Uncle Clayton, Aunt Diane, and several cousins I'd only met once or twice at the wedding. They were dressed like they were attending a garden party at Buckingham Palace. Patricia wore a lavender dress suit with matching pearls. Vanessa had on a cream-colored designer outfit that probably cost more than my car. The men wore blazers and expensive watches. And there I was, in my Target funeral dress, grief etched into every line of my face, looking like exactly what I was, a woman who'd just buried her father and was barely holding it together. "Keisha," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We weren't sure you'd make it. You look like you've been through something." The table erupted in barely concealed laughter. I felt my face burn with humiliation, but I took a seat next to Marcus, who was studiously avoiding my gaze. A server brought out mimosas and petit fours, like this was some kind of celebration. "We were just discussing the upcoming property acquisition in Buckhead," Sterling said, addressing the table. "Morrison Properties is expanding our commercial portfolio, and we need everyone in the family to be aligned on the vision. Everyone who has a stake in this company's future." "Everyone who matters anyway," Vanessa muttered, loud enough for me to hear, and several people at the table smirked. I clenched my fists in my lap, trying to maintain my composure. My father had been dead for 3 days. 3 days. And they were sitting here, making jokes at my expense, discussing business like I wasn't even human. "My father just passed away," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "I buried him 2 days ago." Patricia paused, her mimosa halfway to her lips. "Oh, we know, dear. Marcus mentioned it." "Such a shame. Your father was a mailman, wasn't he?" The way she said mailman made it sound like he'd been selling drugs on a street corner. "Postal worker," I corrected, my jaw so tight I could barely get the words out. "He worked for the United States Postal Service for 38 years. He was a good man." "Oh, I'm sure he was," she said, dabbing at her mouth with a linen napkin. "And at least he had his pension. That's something, I suppose. A little nest egg for his retirement years, even if he didn't get to enjoy them very long." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "Your father was poor. He died with nothing. You came from nothing." Brittany leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "I heard the funeral was at one of those small churches on the west side. You know, the kind with the hand fans and the tambourines. Was it nice?" I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. "It was beautiful," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "It was filled with people who loved him, real people with real hearts." "I'm sure it was," Vanessa said, exchanging a knowing glance with her mother. "It's just so different from our world, you know. The Morrison family has a certain legacy to uphold. Generational wealth, strategic estate planning, investment portfolios that span decades, real financial security that matters, that lasts. What exactly are you trying to say? I asked, my voice rising. I think what Vanessa means, Sterling interjected smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension, is that in this family, we value financial literacy. We value building something substantial that lasts beyond one generation, not just getting by, not just living paycheck to paycheck with a government pension. The words hit me like a physical blow. They were talking about my father, about his life, his sacrifice, like it meant nothing, like he meant nothing, like I meant nothing. My father worked hard every single day of his life, I said, standing up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. He raised me alone after my mother died. He made sure I had everything I needed. He taught me values you people wouldn't understand. Integrity, compassion, hard work, character. Patricia set down her mimosa with a delicate clink. Character doesn't pay the bills, dear. Is that really what you think? I said, my voice shaking with rage. That the only thing that matters is money? Of course not, Sterling said, but his tone suggested otherwise. But let's be realistic, Keisha. You married into this family. You have access to resources, opportunities, a lifestyle you never would have had otherwise. And frankly, we're concerned about what happens when Marcus inherits his share of the company. We need to protect what we've built. We need to ensure that our legacy remains intact. Protect it from what? I said, my voice getting louder. From me? The room went silent. Every eye was on me, and I saw it clearly then. The judgment, the disdain, the absolute certainty that I didn't belong. Keisha, sit down, Marcus said quietly, embarrassment coloring his voice. But I was done sitting down. I was done being quiet. You want to know what I think? I said, my voice ringing through that dining room. I think you're all so obsessed with your money and your status and your precious legacy that you've forgotten what actually matters. My father just died. He's been dead for 3 days, and instead of offering me any compassion or support, you're sitting here making jokes about him, about me, about where I come from. You're worried about protecting your assets. You should be worried about protecting your humanity, because from where I'm standing, you've already lost it. How dare you, Patricia said, her voice ice cold. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? I said, laughing bitterly. What exactly have you done for me, Mrs. Morrison? You've made it clear from day one that I'm not good enough for your son. You've excluded me, insulted me, and treated me like I'm some kind of gold digger when all I've ever wanted was to love your son and build a life with him. And when my father was dying, when he needed help, you called it a bad investment. The room was dead silent now. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice deadly calm. I'm going to walk out of here with whatever dignity I have left. And I'm going to mourn my father surrounded by people who actually have hearts. And one day very soon, you're all going to regret the way you've treated me. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, please. What are you going to do? Paint us an angry portrait? Write us a strongly worded letter? You have nothing, Keisha. No money, no power, no leverage. You're a middle school art teacher whose father just died broke. What exactly are you going to do to make us regret anything? The table erupted in laughter. Even Marcus, my own husband, was smiling. Not laughing, but smiling, like this was all just a minor family squabble that would blow over. That was the moment I knew. My marriage was over. These people would never accept me, would never respect me, and Marcus would never stand up for me. I was alone. I walked out of that dining room, out of that mansion, and I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, but eventually I found myself at my father's house in Mechanicsville. The small, modest 3-bedroom he'd loved so much. I sat on the porch, the same porch where he'd taught me to ride a bike, where we'd eaten watermelon on hot summer days, where he'd given me advice about boys and school and life. And I cried. I cried for my father, for my marriage, for the woman I'd become in trying to fit into a world that would never want me. My phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Ms. Thompson Morrison?" a man's voice said, professional and kind. "This is Leonard Hastings. I'm an attorney, and I was your father's legal counsel. I've been trying to reach you." I sat up straight. "My father had an attorney?" "Yes, ma'am. For quite some time, actually. We need to schedule a reading of his will. It's important that you attend, and your father left specific instructions about who else should be present." I was confused. "Mr. Hastings, my father didn't have anything. He lived modestly. He worked for the Postal Service. I don't think there's much of an estate to distribute." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Thompson Morrison," he said carefully, "I think you need to come to my office. There's quite a bit we need to discuss. Your father left behind more than you know." "What do you mean?" "I can't discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you this. Your father was a very smart man, and he made very strategic decisions about his finances. Decisions that are about to change your life. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" My hands were shaking. Yes, I'll be there." "And Ms. Thompson Morrison, your father left specific instructions that your husband and his family should be present at the will reading. He said it was important. Essential. Actually, why would they need to be there?" "That will become clear tomorrow," Mr. Hastings said. "Trust me." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My grief was still there, heavy and present, but underneath it was something else. Curiosity, hope, and maybe, just maybe, a whisper of justice waiting to unfold. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black pantsuit I'd bought for teacher conferences, my mother's pearl earrings, and minimal makeup. I wanted to look put together, dignified, like my father had always taught me to present myself. I arrived at Leonard Hastings' office building in downtown Atlanta at 9 a.m. sharp. The building was stunning, all glass and steel, reaching 30 stories into the sky. His firm, Hastings and Associates, occupied the entire 18th floor. When I stepped off the elevator, I was greeted by a receptionist who smiled warmly and said Mr. Hastings was expecting me. His office was spacious with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline, the kind of view that probably cost a fortune. Leonard Hastings stood when I entered, and I immediately felt at ease. He was an older black man, probably in his late 60s, with kind brown eyes, silver hair, and an air of quiet authority that reminded me of my father. "Ms. Thompson Morrison," he said, coming around his desk to shake my hand. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a remarkable man." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "But Mr. Hastings, I have to be honest. I'm confused about why I'm here. My father lived simply. He worked for the Postal Service his entire life. I don't understand what kind of estate there could be." He gestured for me to sit, then returned to his chair and folded his hands on his desk. "Keisha, may I call you Keisha?" I nodded. "Your father was indeed a postal worker for 38 years, but what you didn't know, what he deliberately kept from you, was that he was also one of the most strategic investors I've ever had the privilege of working with." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He pulled out a thick folder. Your father first came to see me in 1987, about 6 months after your mother passed away. He told me he wanted to make sure you were taken care of, that you'd never have to struggle the way he had growing up. He'd just received a modest inheritance from his own father, about $25,000, and he wanted to know how to make it grow. My heart was pounding. I didn't know my grandfather left him anything. He kept it quiet, Mr. Hastings said. Jerome was a private man. He didn't believe in flash or showing off. He believed in substance. So we talked about investment strategies, and I was impressed by how quickly he learned. He started buying properties, Keisha. Small properties at first, run-down buildings in neighborhoods people were abandoning. West End, Vine City, Edgewood. Places where property values had bottomed out during the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s. I was having trouble processing this. My father bought real estate? He did. And he held on to those properties for decades, renting them out, maintaining them, waiting. He understood something that a lot of investors don't, that gentrification was coming, that Atlanta was growing, and that those neighborhoods would eventually become valuable again. He was patient, strategic. He never sold a single property unless it was to trade up for something better. Mr. Hastings pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. I looked down at it, and the numbers made my vision blur. This is a summary of your father's real estate holdings, he said quietly. 4 commercial properties. 1 in Virginia Highland, valued at $4.2 million. 1 in Old Fourth Ward, valued at $3.1 million. 1 in West Midtown, valued at $3 million. And 1 in Edgewood, valued at $2 million. Total value, $12.3 million. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. $12 million. My father, the man who drove the same truck for 20 years, who fixed his own plumbing, who used coupons at the grocery store. There's more, Mr. Hastings continued. He also owned a 12-unit apartment building on Memorial Drive that generates $72,000 annually in rental income, and a 6-unit complex in Decatur generating $48,000 a year. I don't understand, I whispered. How did I not know about any of this? Your father was extremely private. He used property management companies. He never touched the rental income, just let it reinvest. He wanted you to earn your own way, to develop your own character without the corrupting influence of money. He told me once that he wanted you to know the value of hard work before you knew the value of wealth. Tears were streaming down my face now. But he could have used this money when he got sick. He could have gotten better treatment, gone to specialists. He could have, Mr. Hastings said gently, but he chose not to. He told me the cancer was advanced, that the treatments would only buy him a few more months of suffering, and that he'd rather leave everything to you than spend it trying to delay the inevitable. He said you were his legacy, not his money. I covered my face with my hands, sobbing. My father had suffered, had died in a county hospice, when he could have afforded the best care in the world, and he'd done it for me, to make sure I'd be taken care of. There's still more, Mr. Hastings said, his voice soft. Your father also had an investment portfolio, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. He started investing in the stock market in 1990, small amounts at first. He bought shares of Apple when they were trading at $18. Amazon when it was under $20. Google when it first went public. Microsoft. Tesla. He understood technology, understood that it was the future, and he held those stocks for decades. He pulled out another document. His investment portfolio is currently valued at $3.8 million. I couldn't even process the numbers anymore. They were too big, too unreal. He also had a life insurance policy through the Postal Service that pays out $1.2 million, and a savings account that he never touched, containing $600,000 in liquid assets that he wanted you to have immediately for any immediate needs. Mr. Hastings looked at me with something like awe in his eyes. Keisha, your father's total estate is valued at approximately $18.9 million, and he left every single penny of it to you. No conditions, no restrictions. It's yours. The room was spinning. $18.9 million. My father, Jerome Williams, who'd worn second-hand clothes and eaten leftovers for lunch, had been worth almost $19 million. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did he keep this secret? He left you a letter, Mr. Hastings said, handing me an envelope. He wanted you to read it after you knew about the inheritance. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. It was in my father's handwriting, slightly shaky but still recognizable. My dearest Keisha, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just learned about the money. I know you're probably confused, maybe even angry that I kept this from you. Let me explain. When your mother died, I made her a promise that I would raise you to be strong, independent, and grounded in values that mattered. I watched too many people in our community get money and lose themselves, lose their character, lose sight of what was important. I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to work hard, to struggle a little, to understand the value of a dollar earned through your own effort. I wanted you to choose your career based on your passion, not on what would make you rich. And you did, baby girl. You became a teacher, one of the most important and undervalued professions in this country. You chose to help kids who looked like us, who came from neighborhoods like ours. You chose service over money. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. I also wanted to see who you would marry. I needed to know if the man you chose would love you for you, not for what you could give him, and I learned everything I needed to know about Marcus Morrison and his family. They treated you like you were beneath them. They made you feel small. And when I got sick and needed help, they called it a bad investment. That told me everything about their character. So here's what I want you to know. You are worth more than all of them combined, not because of this money, but because of who you are. You have integrity, compassion, strength, and grace. You are my legacy, and I am so proud of you. Use this money wisely. Help your students. Start that arts program you've always dreamed about. Buy yourself a home, a car, travel the world if you want. But most importantly, don't let anyone ever make you feel less than again. You are a Williams. Baby girl. We've always stood tall. Love, Daddy. I sat there clutching that letter, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My father had known. He'd known everything. And he'd made sure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable, irrefutable, earth-shattering. There's one more thing, Mr. Hastings said quietly. Your father recorded a video message. He wanted it played at the official will reading in the presence of your husband and his family. He left very specific instructions that they all needed to be there. He said it was important that they hear what he had to say. I looked up, wiping my eyes. When is the will reading? I've scheduled it for tomorrow afternoon at 2:00. I've already contacted Marcus and the Morrison family. They've agreed to attend, though they seemed confused about why they needed to be there. A slow smile spread across my face. They have no idea, do they? Not even a little bit, Mr. Hastings said, returning my smile. Your father wanted to make sure that when they learned the truth, it would be in a way they could never dismiss or diminish. He wanted them to see exactly who you are and who he was. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the guest house bed next to Marcus, who was snoring softly, completely unaware that his entire world was about to change. I thought about my father, about his wisdom, his planning, his love. He'd spent 30 years building a fortune in silence, also that this moment could happen. Also that I could reclaim my dignity, my worth, my power. The next afternoon, I arrived at Leonard Hastings' office at 1:45, 15 minutes early. I wore a tailored black dress I'd gone out and bought that morning, simple but elegant, expensive. I'd gotten my hair done, my nails manicured. I wanted to look like the woman I was about to become. The Morrison family began arriving at 2 o'clock. Sterling walked in first, his expression annoyed, checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Patricia followed in a designer suit, her face pinched with irritation. Vanessa strutted in wearing a power suit and heels, already on her phone. Brittany, Uncle Clayton, Aunt Diane, and Marcus all filed in, looking confused and uncomfortable. "What exactly are we doing here?" Sterling demanded. "This is highly irregular." Leonard Hastings stood at the head of the conference table, completely unruffled. "Thank you all for coming. Please, have a seat." They sat, casting confused glances at each other. I sat at the opposite end of the table, my hands folded calmly, watching them. Marcus tried to catch my eye, but I looked away. "We're here for the reading of Jerome Williams' will," Mr. Hastings began. "Mr. Williams passed away recently, and per his explicit instructions, this will is to be read in the presence of his daughter and her immediate family." "We're not her immediate family," Patricia said coldly. "We're her husband's family. There's a significant difference." "Nevertheless," Mr. Hastings continued, "Mr. Williams requested your presence. So if we could proceed." He opened a leather portfolio and began reading. "The last will and testament of Jerome Emanuel Williams, dated March 15th of this year. I, Jerome Emanuel Williams, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Can we speed this up? I have a deposition at 4. Mr. Hastings ignored her. "To my beloved daughter, Keisha Marie Williams Thompson Morrison, I leave the entirety of my estate to be distributed as follows." The room was quiet now, everyone half listening, assuming this would be brief. There couldn't be much to distribute after all. 4 commercial properties located in the Virginia Highland, Old Fourth Ward, West Midtown, and Edgewood neighborhoods of Atlanta, Georgia, currently valued at a combined total of $12.3 million. The room went dead silent. Patricia's head snapped up. Sterling leaned forward. Vanessa's phone clattered to the table. "I'm sorry," Patricia said, her voice strained. "Did you say million?" "Additionally," Mr. Hastings continued, his voice steady and professional, "a 12-unit apartment building located on Memorial Drive, Atlanta, Georgia, currently generating $72,000 annually in rental income. A 6-unit apartment complex in Decatur, Georgia, generating $48,000 annually in rental income." Sterling's mouth was hanging open. Brittany looked like she might faint. "Furthermore," Mr. Hastings said, clearly enjoying this, "a diversified investment portfolio consisting of stocks in Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, and various other technology and pharmaceutical companies, as well as bonds and mutual funds, currently valued at $3.8 million. "This can't be real," Vanessa whispered. "A life insurance policy in the amount of $1.2 million. and a personal savings account containing $600,000 in immediately liquid assets. Mr. Hastings looked up from the document. The total value of Mr. Jerome Williams' estate is $18.9 million, all of which is now the sole property of Mrs. Keisha Thompson Morrison, to do with as she sees fit. You could have heard a feather drop. The Morrisons were frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Patricia's perfectly applied lipstick seemed garish against her suddenly pale face. Sterling's confident demeanor had completely crumbled. Vanessa looked like she was going to be sick. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "How?" Patricia finally managed to choke out. "How is this possible? He was a mailman." "Postal worker," I said quietly, speaking for the first time, "and a brilliant investor. One of the smartest men you'll ever have the misfortune of underestimating." Mr. Hastings pulled out a tablet. "There's more. Mr. Williams recorded a video message that he wanted played at this reading. He was very specific that everyone in this room needed to see it." He pressed play, and suddenly my father's face filled the screen. He was sitting in his living room, wearing his favorite cardigan, looking tired but determined, his eyes still sharp with intelligence and purpose. "Hello, everyone," he began, his voice strong despite the illness that was consuming him. "If you're watching this, then I've passed on, and my daughter has just learned about the inheritance I left her. Keisha, baby girl, I hope you understand now why I kept this secret. I wanted you to know your own worth before you knew your financial worth." He paused, taking a breath. "But this message isn't just for Keisha. It's for the Morrison family." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I know how you treated my daughter," my father continued, his voice hardening. "Keisha never told me much. She's too proud, too kind. But a father knows. I saw the pain in her eyes every time she came back from one of your family dinners. I heard the hurt in her voice when she talked about how you made her feel invisible, inadequate, not good enough. I watched her shrink a little more each time she was in your presence." Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But she couldn't look away from the screen. "And when I got sick," my father said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger, "when my daughter came to you, to her husband's family, asking for help to get me into a better treatment facility, you called it a bad investment. You have more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes, and you called saving a man's life a bad investment." Sterling's face had gone red. "So I want you to know something, all of you," my father continued. "The woman you've been treating like she wasn't good enough, like she was beneath you, like she married your son for his money, she's now worth more than your entire family's net worth. According to my research, and I did extensive research, Morrison Properties is valued at approximately $15 to $16 million. My daughter's inheritance is $18.9 million. She's richer than all of you combined." Vanessa made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. "And she earned it," my father said, his voice rising with pride and passion. "Not by looking down on people, not by hoarding wealth, not by treating service workers and teachers and postal workers like they're beneath you. She earned it by being the daughter of a man who worked hard, invested smart, and never ever forgot where he came from. A man who understood that character is worth more than cash, but that having both is even better." He leaned forward, and his eyes seemed to bore through the screen directly into each person's soul. "Jerome Williams was never just a mailman. I was a husband, a father, a community member, an investor, a strategist, And a man who built something real while you people were busy congratulating yourselves on your inherited wealth and your precious legacy. I started with $25,000 and turned it into almost $20 million. What did you do? You were born into money and acted like that made you special. The Morrisons looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Keisha, my father said, his voice softening again, his eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to see what happens next, but I know you're going to be magnificent. Use this money wisely, baby girl. Invest in your students. Start that arts education program you've dreamed about. Buy yourself a house, a car, take care of yourself for once. And if your husband and his family can't love you for who you are, if they can't treat you with the respect you deserve, then they don't deserve the privilege of being in your life. He paused, gathering himself. To the Morrison family, I'll say this. My daughter didn't need your approval. She never did. She has her own legacy now, one built on my hard work, my sacrifice, and her incredible character. I hope this serves as a lesson about judging people, about assumptions, about the danger of believing that money makes you better than anyone else. Because at the end of the day, we all end up in the same place, and the only thing that matters is what we did with our time here and how we treated people along the way. He smiled then, a sad but satisfied smile. Remember, baby girl, it's not about how much money you have. It's about what you do with it and who you become in the process. I love you forever. Your daddy. The screen went black, and the silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. They just sat there, faces pale, expressions shattered, their entire understanding of reality dismantled in the span of 15 minutes. Finally, I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me, and for the first time since I'd met these people, I felt powerful. Not because of the money, though that certainly helped, but because the truth had finally been spoken, and there was no way for them to dismiss it, diminish it, or explain it away. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice calm and clear, looking directly at Marcus. Our marriage has been over for a long time. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I believe you. You let your family disrespect me for years. You stood by while they mocked my father at my lowest moment. You smiled when they laughed at me. You chose them over me every single time. That's not a marriage. That's betrayal. Keisha, wait, Marcus said, half rising from his chair, his voice desperate. We can work this out. I was wrong. I should have defended you. I should have stood up for you. Please, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Marcus. You had 5 years to talk. 5 years to choose me. You never did. And now that you know what I'm worth financially, suddenly I matter to you. But I mattered before, too. You just couldn't see it. I turned to face the rest of them. Mrs. Morrison, you made it your personal mission to make me feel worthless. You succeeded for a while. You made me doubt myself, question my value, wonder if maybe I really wasn't good enough. But my father made sure I'd remember who I really am. And I'm not the woman you tried to break. I'm Jerome Williams' daughter, and that means I'm somebody. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Actually, I continued, pulling a document from my purse. There's something else you should know. Those commercial properties my father left me, the building in Virginia Highland, that's the property Morrison Properties has been trying to acquire for the past 8 months for your new luxury development project. You've been negotiating with the property management company, offering $4.5 million. Sterling's eyes widened in recognition. You've been negotiating with my father's property management company, I said, smiling. And now you're negotiating with me, and the answer is no, I'm not selling. Instead, I'm going to convert that building into the Jerome Williams Center for Arts Education. Free art classes for underprivileged youth, free supplies, mentorship programs, scholarships, everything my father believed in, everything I want to build, everything your family thinks is a waste of time. You can't be serious, Sterling sputtered, finally finding his voice. That development is worth tens of millions. You'd be throwing away a fortune. No, I said. I'd be investing in something that actually matters, something that changes lives instead of just building another luxury condo tower for rich people who already have too much. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. I'll be filing for full division of assets acquired during our marriage. That includes the stocks I purchased with my teaching salary, the car I bought, and anything else I contributed to while we were together. You won't get a penny of my inheritance. Georgia law is very clear on that, but I'll make sure I get what's rightfully mine. I looked at each of them one final time. My father used to tell me that the truth always comes to light eventually, that justice might be delayed, but it's never denied. I didn't believe him for a long time. I thought people like you always won, that money and power meant you could treat people however you wanted without consequences. But I was wrong. There are consequences, and you're looking at them. And with that, I walked out of that conference room, out of that building, and into my new life. The elevator ride down felt like shedding a skin, leaving behind years of humiliation and pain. When I stepped out onto the Atlanta street, the sun was shining, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The divorce was finalized within 4 months. Marcus tried to fight for half of my inheritance, hiring expensive lawyers who argued that as my spouse, he was entitled to a portion of the estate. But Georgia law was crystal clear. Inherited assets received by one spouse during the marriage remain separate property and are not subject to division in a divorce. His lawyers argued that some of the appreciation on the properties happened during our marriage, but my legal team, led by Leonard Hastings and the best family law attorney in Atlanta, shut that down quickly. Marcus walked away with his trust fund, his salary, and the shame of knowing he'd lost the best thing that ever happened to him. The Morrison family's reputation in Atlanta's social circles took a significant hit. Word spread quickly about what had happened at the will reading. People talked. They always do, especially in tight-knit communities like Atlanta's Black elite, where everyone knows everyone and secrets don't stay secret for long. Business associates started viewing the Morrisons differently. Several lucrative partnerships fell through. Their country club memberships didn't mean quite as much anymore. Patricia stopped hosting her famous charity galas because attendance had dropped significantly. People didn't want to be associated with a family that had treated someone so poorly, especially when that someone turned out to be worth more than them. I bought a stunning home in Cascade Heights, a beautiful historic neighborhood with tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and a strong sense of Black community and pride. The house was a gorgeous craftsman style with 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a large backyard perfect for hosting gatherings. It felt like home the moment I walked through the door. My father would have loved it. I kept teaching at Douglas Middle School, at least for that first year. The kids needed me, and I needed them. They kept me grounded, reminded me what mattered. But I also started pouring resources into my school's art program. New supplies, new equipment, field trips to museums, visiting artists. I wanted my students to have opportunities I'd never had growing up. And then I started the Jerome Williams Foundation for Arts Education. I hired a small but dedicated staff, found office space in Midtown, and began developing programs. After-school art classes, summer intensive workshops, scholarships for students who wanted to pursue art in college, mentorship programs connecting young artists with professionals. Within the first year, we'd helped over 500 students across Metro Atlanta. Within 2 years, we'd expanded to other cities in Georgia. I poured $3 million into the foundation's endowment, ensuring it would continue long after I was gone. The Virginia Highland property was transformed into the Jerome Williams Arts Center. The renovation took 18 months and cost $2 million, but when it opened, it was magnificent. State-of-the-art studios for painting, sculpture, digital arts, and photography. A black box theater for performance art, a gallery showcasing student work, classrooms equipped with the latest technology, and best of all, it was completely free for any student who wanted to participate. No applications, no prerequisites, no barriers, just kids with dreams and the tools to pursue them. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was one of the proudest days of my life. Hundreds of people came, students, parents, teachers, community leaders, local artists. Uncle Clayton, Marcus's uncle, showed up with a generous donation check and a genuine apology. "I was wrong about you," he said, shaking my hand. "We all were. What you're doing here, it's remarkable. Your father would be incredibly proud." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means a lot." He became a mentor after that, helping me navigate real estate investments and business decisions, introducing me to community leaders and potential donors. He was the only Morrison who had the courage to admit he'd been wrong and actually try to make amends. I respected him for that. Vanessa reached out about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She sent an email, carefully worded, that felt more like a legal document than an apology. It was filled with phrases like regrettable misunderstandings and unfortunate circumstances, but never actually used the words, "I'm sorry." I deleted it without responding. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, and some people aren't capable of genuine remorse. Marcus tried to reconnect several times too. He'd show up at the Arts Center, at events I was hosting, sending flowers and lengthy texts about how he'd changed, how he understood now, how he wanted another chance. But I knew the truth. He didn't miss me. He missed the idea of me, or more accurately, he missed the money and status I now represented. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce, he showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the garden, planting roses like my mother used to do, my hands dirty and my hair tied back in a scarf. "Keisha," he said, standing at the edge of my porch looking uncertain. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I said, not looking up from my planting. "I've moved on, Marcus. You should too. I made a mistake. I know that now. I should have defended you. I should have put you first." I finally looked up at him, really looked at him, and I saw a man who'd lost his way, who'd chosen comfort and family approval over love and integrity. And I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no longing, just indifference. "You didn't make a mistake, Marcus. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Over years. You chose your family's approval over your wife's dignity. You chose money over character. You chose comfort over courage. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions that showed me exactly who you are." "I can change," he said desperately. "I have changed." "Maybe you have," I said, standing up and brushing the dirt from my hands. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I've moved on. I've built a life I'm proud of. I'm doing work that matters. I'm surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. I don't need your approval, your family's acceptance, or your regret. I'm happy, Marcus, truly happy, and you had your chance to be part of that." He stood there for a long moment, then finally nodded and walked away. I never saw him again. Patricia and Sterling tried to save face in various ways. They made large donations to local charities, suddenly becoming very public about their philanthropy. They hosted events highlighting their commitment to community development, but people saw through it. The whispers at society gatherings, the side eyes at charity galas, the way conversations would pause when they entered a room, it all spoke to a truth they couldn't escape. They'd been exposed, and no amount of money or PR could change what people now knew about their character. 2 years after my father's death, I stood on the stage at the Jerome Williams Art Center, looking out at an auditorium filled with students, parents, educators, and community members. We were celebrating our 2nd anniversary and showcasing the work of 50 young artists whose lives had been changed by our programs. "My father taught me something that took me years to fully understand," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and strong. "He taught me that wealth isn't just about what's in your bank account. It's about what you build, who you help, who you lift up, and what you leave behind." My father could have lived in a mansion. He could have driven luxury cars, worn designer clothes, and shown off his wealth. Instead, he lived simply, invested wisely, and built a legacy that would change lives long after he was gone. I paused, looking at the young faces in the audience, seeing myself in many of them. He worked for the Postal Service for 38 years. Some people looked down on that. They thought it made him less than. They thought his life had less value because he didn't have a fancy title or a corner office. But those people were wrong. My father was a genius. He was a strategist. He was a man who understood that true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in dignity, in integrity, in the impact you have on others. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. This center, these programs, the scholarships we offer, they're all built on his sacrifice, his vision, and his love. He wanted to make sure that kids like you, kids from neighborhoods that people overlook, kids whose parents work hard but don't have extra money for art supplies or music lessons, would have opportunities, would have a chance, would know that they matter, that their dreams matter, that they're valuable exactly as they are. I felt tears gathering in my eyes but kept going. So to every young person here tonight, I want you to know something. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small because of where you come from, what your parents do for work, or how much money your family has. Your worth isn't determined by those things. It's determined by your character, your kindness, your creativity, your courage. And this center, this foundation, we're here to remind you of that every single day. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the auditorium. Parents were crying. Teachers were on their feet. Students were cheering. And I looked up at the sky through the skylight and swore I felt my father's presence, proud and strong, reminding me that I'd always been enough, long before the money, long before the validation, long before the world finally caught up to what he'd always known. After the ceremony, I stayed behind to talk with students and their families. A young girl, maybe 13, with beautiful dark skin and long braids, approached me shyly. "Ms. Williams?" she said. "Yes, sweetheart." "Thank you," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "Before I came here, nobody believed in my art. My teachers said it was a waste of time. My family said I should focus on something practical. But you believed in me. You gave me supplies and classes and a place where I could just create. You changed my life." I knelt down to her level. Baby girl, I didn't change your life. You changed your own life. I just gave you the tools. Your talent, your vision, your hard work. That's all you. And don't you ever forget it." She hugged me, and I hugged her back. And in that moment, I understood exactly what my father had been trying to teach me. This was the legacy that mattered. Not the money, not the properties, not even the justice of proving the Morrisons wrong. This young girl who now believed in herself, the 500 other students whose lives had been touched by our programs, the teachers who now had resources to nurture creativity, the community that had been given a space to celebrate art and culture. 3 years after my father's death, I met someone new. His name was David, and he was a professor of African American Studies at Spelman College. We met at an art gallery opening in Castleberry Hill, standing in front of the same painting, arguing good-naturedly about the artist's use of color. He was brilliant, funny, passionate about education and social justice, and he had no idea who I was or what I was worth. We dated for 6 months before I told him about the inheritance. I needed to know he loved me, not for my money. His response was perfect. "That's amazing that your father was able to build that kind of wealth," he said. "But it doesn't change how I feel about you. I fell in love with the woman who showed up to volunteer at my community literacy program in jeans and a t-shirt. The woman who talks passionately about empowering young artists. The woman who remembers every student's name and genuinely cares about their dreams. That's who you are, Keisha. The money is just money." We got married a year later, a simple ceremony at the Arts Center with close friends and family. No fancy country club reception, no pressure to impress anyone. Just love, joy, and community. Uncle Clayton came, a few of my former colleagues from Douglas Middle School, my best friend Maya from college, who'd supported me through the darkest days of my first marriage, and dozens of students whose lives had been touched by the foundation. As I stood there in my simple white dress, holding David's hands and saying my vows, I thought about how far I'd come. From the girl who'd been made to feel invisible at Morrison family dinners, to the woman who'd built something meaningful, something lasting. From the teacher who'd spent her own money on art supplies, to the founder of a foundation that was changing lives across Georgia. From the grieving daughter who'd buried her father in a county hospice, to the woman who'd honored his legacy in the most powerful way possible. 4 years after my father's death, the Jerome Williams Foundation expanded into Alabama and Tennessee. We'd helped over 2,000 students. We'd awarded $3 million in scholarships. We'd created partnerships with 30 schools across 3 states, and we were just getting started. The foundation's endowment had grown to $5 million, ensuring sustainability for decades to come. I also started using my real estate investments strategically, working with community development organizations to create affordable housing in gentrifying neighborhoods, to support Black-owned businesses, to preserve the cultural heritage of historic Black communities that were being pushed out by development. It wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. I was invited to speak at conferences, to share my father's story and the lessons I'd learned. I talked about generational wealth, about financial literacy in Black communities, about the importance of estate planning and strategic investing. I wanted other families to know that building wealth didn't require a fancy degree or a high-paying job. It required discipline, patience, strategic thinking, and a long-term vision. One day, I received a letter from Patricia Morrison, not an email. An actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dear Keisha," it began, I know I have no right to contact you, and I fully expect you to discard this letter without reading it, but I need to try. I need you to know that I was wrong. Not just wrong about you, but wrong about so many things. I let pride, fear, and classism dictate my behavior. I treated you terribly because I was afraid. Afraid that you would take my son away from me, afraid that you represented values that challenged the world I'd built, afraid that your presence exposed the shallowness of the life I'd created. I kept reading, surprised by the raw honesty. Watching what you've built with your father's legacy, seeing the impact you've had on thousands of young lives, has forced me to confront some painful truths about myself. I spent my whole life accumulating wealth and status, believing that made me superior. But you've shown me what true legacy looks like. And it has nothing to do with country club memberships or designer handbags. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see you now, truly see you, and I recognize that my son lost something irreplaceable when he lost you. I hope life brings you continued joy and purpose. With sincere regret, Patricia Morrison. I read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Some wounds run too deep for simple apologies to heal, but I appreciated the honesty, the acknowledgement. It was more than I'd ever expected to receive. 5 years after my father's death, I stood at his grave on a warm spring afternoon, much like the day we'd buried him. But everything was different now. I brought fresh flowers, wild flowers like my mother used to love, and I sat on the grass beside his headstone. "Hey, Daddy," I said, arranging the flowers. "I came to give you an update. The foundation just hit 3,000 students served. We're expanding into Mississippi and North Carolina next year. Can you believe that? Your postal worker salary and smart investments are now changing lives across the entire Southeast." I smiled, tears sliding down my cheeks. "And Daddy, I met someone. His name is David, and he's wonderful. He loves me for me, just like you always said someone would. We're talking about adopting, maybe giving a child the kind of love and opportunity you gave me." A breeze rustled through the trees, and I felt my father's presence so strongly it almost took my breath away. "The Morrisons, well, they're still around. Marcus remarried someone from their social circle, someone appropriate, I guess. Patricia and Sterling are older, quieter. Vanessa moved to New York, but I don't think about them much anymore. They don't have power over me. They can't hurt me, because I know who I am. I'm Jerome Williams' daughter, and that makes me somebody." I stood up, brushing grass from my dress. "Thank you, Daddy. Thank you for the sacrifice, for the planning, for loving me enough to let me find my own way before you showed me yours. Thank you for teaching me that wealth without character is worthless, but character with wealth can change the world. I promise I'll keep making you proud. I promise I'll keep standing tall. I love you forever." As I walked back to my car, I thought about the journey, about the pain, the humiliation, the loss, but also about the triumph, the redemption, the justice. My father had given me more than money. He'd given me the ultimate lesson about worth, about value, about legacy. Sometimes the people who doubt you the loudest are the ones who fear your potential the most. The Morrison family saw me as a threat from the very beginning, not because I was unworthy, but because deep down, they knew I didn't need them to define my value. They knew that real worth comes from character, not cash flow, from integrity, not inheritance, from what you build, not what you're born into. My father understood something that took me years to learn. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you see yourself, how you show up in the world, and what you do with the gifts you've been given, whether those gifts are financial resources or simply the gift of another day to make a difference. If you're in a situation where people make you feel small, where they judge you based on your zip code, your job title, your family background, or the size of your bank account, remember this: their opinions are not your reality. Your character, your integrity, your heart, your capacity for love and compassion and creativity, those are what matter. Those are what last. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of making sure the truth comes to light. Justice might be delayed, but it's never denied. The scales will balance, maybe not in the way you expect or when you expect, but they will balance. My father made sure of that. He spent 30 years quietly building a fortune, not for luxury or status, but so that one day, at exactly the right moment, the truth would be revealed in a way that couldn't be dismissed or denied, so that I would know, without a doubt, that I was valuable, worthy, and loved. That's the real inheritance he left me, not the $18.9 million, though I'm grateful for every penny and the opportunity it's given me to help others. The real inheritance is the knowledge that I am enough, that I always was, that the Morrisons' judgment said everything about them and nothing about me, that my father saw my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. That legacy isn't about what you leave behind, it's about what you leave in the people you touch. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own worth, if it gave you hope that justice exists and truth prevails, then please do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to Milan Folk Tales for more stories of resilience, redemption, courage, and the kind of justice that restores faith in humanity. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my community is watching from, where my people are standing tall and refusing to be diminished. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's being made to feel small. Someone who's doubting their worth. Someone who needs to be reminded that their value isn't determined by others' opinions, but by the content of their character and the courage of their convictions. Remember, you are worthy. You are valuable. You matter. Your dreams matter. Your story isn't over yet. And just like my father proved, sometimes the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the underestimated ones, are the ones who've been planning the most powerful moves all along. Stand tall. Your legacy is being written right now in every choice you make, every person you help, every dream you chase. Make it count. Make it matter. Make your ancestors proud. I know my father is proud of me. And wherever you are, Daddy, thank you for everything. Forever your grateful daughter, Keisha Williams.